Hey everyone, welcome to the Houndations podcast. I'm your host, Tony Peterson. We have a special bonus episode for you today where Ben Brettingen from Onyx and I are going to break down how to find birds on public land. So we are at the Southeastern Wildlife Expo right now, and I'm about to talk to my buddy Ben, who works for Onyx, passionate bird hunter, loves to hunt roosters just like I do. And we are just going to talk a little bit about our strategy for finding birds, because a lot of times you hear people say that, there are no public land bird opportunities, and we're down here way in the Southeast. We're in Charleston, South Carolina, so we're kind of in like quail territory, and you hear this across the country. And so Ben and I are going to break this down right now. So Ben, the first question I have for you is, when you go duck hunting, let's say you got a bunch of mallards scouted out.
Yep.
Are you usually the kind of guy who's there before first light, or do you show up about 3 hours later?
I like to find a good flight, a loafing shoot generally, where you show up at noon.
I'm giving Ben a little bit of shit because we had a little scheduling issue this morning.
I was working on Pacific time in my defense.
A lot of stuff happens at these shows.
Yeah.
Keep you out pretty late, make the mornings a little early.
Yeah.
But seriously, man, thanks for doing this. I know, you and I have kind of flown in the same circles. We live in the same state. And I know you're super passionate about the public land bird thing, getting your dogs out there. And I know you hear this, and I hear this a lot, and this is why I want to do this. People always say, I would love to hunt X. I would love to hunt Y. You hear, in this part of the world, it's quail, right? There's no bobwhite quail left. And there's nothing worth hunting, or the grouse population's low, but you find birds every year in multiple species. How do you start?
Yeah. So here's the biggest thing. It's a bit of a kicker, but it shouldn't be a secret, is I go to where the birds live.
Okay.
Again, like, that's the biggest thing.
So what do you say to somebody who's like, there are no birds on the public land where I live?
Well, go somewhere else. There's two ways to skin the cat. First is go to where they live. Go to where the best populations are. If you want to travel. But there's also, on the flip side, if you want to stay local, odds are there are birds, especially if we talk about pheasant country, there will be birds there.
Right.
It is just finding the optimal piece of habitat to be able to hunt. On bad bird years, there are only birds in the best spots. On good bird years, then you can go hunt marginal habitat and still find birds, but it's just depending on where are they going to live.
Yeah, you see this a lot. I live in the suburbs of the Twin Cities, and so when I moved up there, that's part of the reason I started duck hunting, because I could find migratory birds that would hit some of the ponds and the rivers, and I had to, I would rather pheasant hunt. I just would, but that's not what you have, and then you start to realize, okay, well, I'm not going to kill a grouse here. I'm not going to kill a rooster, but the woodcock migration comes through. And now you're out there sitting on your tree stand in early October, and you're like, okay, there's another opportunity happening here. And I think I see this a lot, with people who dream about Western big game. I'd love to hunt elk, but I never will because of Y or Z. It's like, well, there's still hunts out there, but you're going to have to change your expectations.
Right.
And the bird world, it's easier to be like, there's no wild pheasants in Iowa anymore, and I'm not going to do it. And it's like,
that's just not true, right?
Right.
They're there. Well, that's one thing I really appreciate about you, Tony, is I followed you a lot, the big game, deer hunting. You go out and it's all about expectations, right? You weren't going out and shooting booners, but you were successful in a lot of different states chasing deer. And that's a great eye-opener. It should be an example for a lot of people. It's you can go do this. Don't expect to light the world on fire just because you went to South Dakota. Don't expect that you're going to light the world on fire. It's still tough in a lot of situations on public land, but if you set those expectations correctly, it's going to be a successful trip. And I always tell people, if you go and do it, go drive and experience it, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're not going to find a bunch of birds.
Right.
That's fine, right? You're not going to die generally. Hopefully not, right?
Right. Well, I kind of equate this. I grew up in southeastern Minnesota, so I fished the Mississippi River a lot. And if you were a bass guy or a northern guy, walleyes would be a little different. But you could look at the backwaters of the Mississippi and be like, there are thousands and thousands of acres of bass cover bassy looking cover, right? But you start getting in there and there's no current here and it's not the right stuff. And then you find that sand drop or you find something where you're like, oh, they are here because the shad are fed to them or whatever. There's like an advantage. People in the bird world, you take pheasants and you go, I want to walk that knee-high CRP,
exactly.
and I want to watch my dog work perfectly and flush those birds when it's birdie or get on that tripod point. And it's like, if you're on a private place that's been babysat or you're early season and you have that high population, you might be able to expect that hunt.
Yeah.
If it's December,
that's not going to be a reality in most situations.
Right. So it's a matter of people think that they're going to go out there. Their expectation is that I'm going to go out there because you hunt pheasants this way in this cover.
Yeah.
But those pheasants that live that way in that cover are dead. And so you have to go, okay, my hunt is going to be different now, but it doesn't mean that they're not there.
Yeah.
It just means that they're not going to be there where it's easy.
Well, and the other thing too is like they might be there, but it's a situation that doesn't yield itself well for you being able to get on them and shoot them.
Right.
Like, sure, they're certainly utilizing, maybe it's like early successional habitat, but the problem is it's thin, it's short, they're going to be spooky, they're going to run, and where are they going to run to or fly to? The cattails.
Right.
And that's where you got to play with them in a lot of situations.
Right. And that's, I always tell people, we were talking right before this, like the closest thing to dying and going to heaven for me right now is walking into a giant cattail slough in the late season because I know there's enough birds in there to work. Whether I'm going to walk out with a limit or not, I know my dog's going to be bloody and it's going to be you're going to feel like you did something. But I always tell people, like, we pull into parking areas and we'll see people leaving and you can still look out there, and if it's the right cover and you know how to read it, you're like, there's multiple limits here still. Mm-hmm. I just need to solve for that. Yeah. And so instead of going and walking around the edge like the last guy did, and all the birds got pushed in the middle, or, you think about, I use, coming from the space that I come from, I use Onyx for whitetail hunting and Western hunting religiously, turkey hunting trips. What I didn't realize was how I had started using it just to find parcels, right? Like, I'm like, okay, well, I could pheasant hunt this 320 or this section or whatever, but you start toggling between layers and seeing lowland and then looking at it, like on the topo layer, and then looking at it on, the hybrid layer or whatever, and seeing, okay, now it looks like this is mostly this, but in the back corner, there's a huge cattail slough or something lower where those birds are going to be, and you can start to be targeted instead of burning yourself out and burning your dog out. And I think a lot of people do that, where they're like, I'm just going to accept that this is going to suck and not be good, instead of going like, okay, well, if you have X amount of physical capital and you're going to burn it on the grass hunt where they're not going to be, you could go hunt that cattail slough that's in the back corner and probably have a better chance, or go hit that vein of willows or dogwood or whatever and just make it happen. Yeah.
I mean, I applaud you for going and busting cattails. My technique is a little different because I absolutely hate just marching through. Like, that sounds like my hell. So that is very fun that you're like, I love this. That's cool. But yeah, like the biggest thing is being successful, whether it's quail, whether it's pheasants, whether it's XYZ bird species. The people that I find that are good at scouting are people that can understand aerial imagery and translate to what that looks like on the ground.
Right.
That period. Like, you look at a map and you're like, oh, that's, that looks like some cattails next to some thick grass. Okay, here's some, like, a little shelter belt next to it. Oh, okay, the grass gets a little thinner, grass gets a little thicker. And you can just quickly look at a map and say, oh yeah, that'll be a good spot.
Right.
That's the biggest thing.
And that's something we preach on the whitetail side specifically a lot, is like, if you're winter scouting and you find something, look at what it looks like. Yes. So you can repeat that pattern when you draw that Iowa tag. And one of the places that I think that's most valuable. So I talk a lot about pheasants because I love it, and I know you do. But when you think about the big wood stuff, whether you're in northern Michigan or you're in some of these swamps down here somewhere, and you have some level of timber activity and you have some level of true swamp edge, maybe where you'll have your woodcock or whatever, when you start to plan your routes around that stuff, instead of just like, okay, I'm going to walk the two track that literally everybody walks, right, and the dumb grouse have been shot out since September 20th. And you start to do that and you go, okay, well, I flushed 3 birds in a row on this walk. Why? Are you on that soft edge? Was there timber, did they clear cut this 7 years ago? Like, what are you working with? Because as soon as you start putting those pieces together, you're like, I'm not wasting time anymore.
Yeah.
Like I have a calculated route and I know the wind. And so I'm like, well, I can swoop down here, find some woodcock, or there should be grouse on this route. And man, you start putting pieces like patterns like that together. So fun.
Yeah. And to that point, it's like, you talk about whether it's a big marsh or a big woods, it's those nuances that often make a difference. Like, oh, this is just a giant patch of woods. It's like, no. Like, if you move a bird, I do it a lot with fishing too. It's like, why is that bird here, right? Like, open up its crop, look at why it's here, especially in the case with grouse. I think grouse are much more multidimensional than a pheasant. Like, pheasants, like, where they're going to be, but grouse can be a bit of a game. But like figure out, stop, look around, say, hey, why is this bird here right now? And then go replicate that. So that's why I preach, like, on Onyx to go put a pin. It's like, if you shoot a bird, put a pin. So then in the moment, it's hard to, it's like you're fired up, you want to go hunt birds. Like, I'm blowing and going when I'm hunting, but I'll always drop a pin on the spot or kill a bird, because then I'll take a step back, like after the hunt or this time of year when it's, not a lot going on. And I'll look back and say, like, oh, like, start to put together patterns and start to hone in and get better at finding birds versus just like, oh, that was fun, shot birds here. It's like the why behind it will help make you a better bird hunter.
Huge. And that's, I think that a lot of people look at bird hunting with their dogs sort of like a lot of Western hunters look at like elk hunting. Like, I'm going to walk down my opportunity. I'm going to go find it, and I don't need a bunch of inputs. Like on the whitetail side, we're obsessed with like the setup. Right. Like, is it the conditions? Is it the spot? Like, where are they at seasonally? And, like Western hunting, you're just like, I'm going to go out and wait for one to bugle or spot one in a meadow. Bird hunters do that a lot.
Yeah.
Where they're like, well, I just like walking through this spot, so I'm going to just go do this, regardless of time of day, time of season.
Right.
Is it a Saturday afternoon or is it a Tuesday morning? And I'll tell you what, I got a lesson last year. I do a lot of, I do more early season grouse hunting than I ever have, because I've been over in northern Wisconsin a lot the last few years with my daughters.
Yeah.
And the gray dogwood thing, I've been around gray dogwoods. They're all over that kind of region. But my daughter drew a bear tag last year. And so we were over there just before the deer and the grouse season opened up, baiting bears and hunting them. And I'm not a good bear hunter, but I had this bear that was really consistent. I'm like, God, I hope this one sticks.
Right.
And I pulled her out of school. I was so confident that bear was going to come in. We hunted. It didn't come in. And I go, so it must have known we were there, right? Like, I got to fill in the blanks.
Right.
Well, that night I told my daughter, I said, this bear's been coming in randomly all day long. Let's go do an all-day bear sit.
Oh, man.
Just see.
Yeah.
She killed that bear at noon.
Really?
And that bear was full. I mean, full of gray dogwood berries.
Huh.
And so I was like, if this is a valuable enough food source today to keep a bear from coming into a pile of donuts.
No kidding. Like,
and gummy bears and shit,
right.
Then you're like, if you're a grouse, if you're a 1 pound bird out there, that is what you're going to do every day until that food source is gone.
Right.
And so, like you said, if you're out there and you're like, I'm flushing birds here, there, whatever, I kill one, and you open it up and you see those white berries in there because they're ripe, like, there's your pattern. Where is that food source again?
Man.
And I love that shit.
Yeah, that is super interesting. Yeah, because it's like, that's a good point. Like, I never thought about that. But yeah, it's like this year we had quite a bumper crop for acorns in a lot of the state, right?
Right.
And this year more than ever, I saw grouse with 5-6 whole acorns in their crop, and early on in the year, and it was like, at first it was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, whatever, I've shot this grouse that's got a bunch of acorns in it, but like, it happened consistently, and so we actually spent some time up in the northeast part of the state where oak trees are not super common. But after seeing this all year, it was like, this was later in the season, I'm going to go and find oak trees. And it was funny because generally oaks are not going to be a preferred species of trees for grouse, generally. You're looking for that stem density, but I turned on, I think it was a oak producing or acorn producing oak slayer, and I was like, I'm just gonna try this. I'm gonna I don't care about what the cover looks like, but I would run my dog in that northeast or in the northeast region where there's not very many oaks. I would go and find those oaks, and it seemingly didn't matter what the cover looked like.
Right.
And there would be, now whether they would hold or not was a different story, but there'd be grouse there.
Right.
So
Well, I mean, one of the things that I've noticed, I see this a lot with grouse, is when you spend a lot of time in tree stands, like in the big woods, you see them doing things. Like, I think people have, you kind of alluded to this earlier, like I think people have this idea that rough grouse specifically don't really cover a lot of ground. You know, like, oh, they don't run, like they don't do a lot of these things that we think, like people say they don't do, which is, they do all of those things. And often when there's a food source like that, like I noticed this last year when I was hunting in northern Wisconsin, one of the spots I set up on this huge chunk of public land, just like miles of big woods, I had grouse flying into a tree not very far away from me, where it was like you would see them coming through the woods and they would land in there, feed, and they would fly back out.
Interesting.
And I've seen that I've seen that sitting, because you do like an all-day sit, you just notice.
Yeah.
Like they're not even walking in a lot of times, where you'd be like, oh, they're picking along. They're like, there's my destination food source.
I'm going there,
and then I'm going to leave and go back to something. Yeah. That shit's so valuable.
Oh, 100. That's really interesting, especially with grouse, which are so multifaceted. That's like another situation setup that works well for pheasants, grouse, XYZ games, bird species, is finding that mosaic of cover where there are a lot of different parts all together in one area. Because with grouse, like I mean, I haven't even, there's a few people I know that have like figured out, they're biologists, like they understand. I have not like figured out the game, so it's like I'm gonna put myself in an area where there are pines, there's aspens, there's cover if it rains, and I'm gonna put myself in those areas where there's the most diversity of cover in one area, because at some point I'm gonna stumble across something, or my dog is gonna go point something. Right. Same thing for pheasants. Cattails, shortgrass, longgrass, crops, like everything in one area, you increase your odds of finding something, just by happenstance, because there's so many types of cover.
Well, that's a good point, because a lot of times we talk about these like very specific incidences where you're like, I saw these animals do this thing specifically, and so I think people take that away and they're like, well, I got to go out and find that lone tree in the big woods that's dropping acorns. It's not like that.
No,
it's like, I think one of the most basic rules to follow with this, and it kind of bleeds into almost all of my hunting and fishing, is edges matter.
Yes.
Hard edges, soft edges. Hard edges are easiest to see, but soft edges, like when you wade into, or let's say this, you stand back and look at a cattail slough, and it's 100 acres of cattails. It looks like monohabitat from here to the end. And then you wade in there, and a lot of it just sucks. But one part will be blown down this way because of the way the hills are in the distance, and the winds came through at whatever time. Right. And then there's a ditch, and so there's like that sawgrass mixed in there. And then you get inside of it, and then for some reason it's wetter or drier, and there's a soft edge in there that might have, like a little plum thicket going through there. Yes. And all of a sudden, instead of just wading into nothingness and being like, I'm just gonna guerrilla warfare my way through, 3 hours of cattails, you're like, I literally can see the route I should probably take, because I'm either going to hit those hard edges or like hardish edges where they're going to stop and wait for me, or they're just going to be there because there's multiple types of cover, not just the geothermal cover, not just the overhead cover, the brushy berry stuff. And so you don't have to have like that knowledge where you're like, I know they eat this on this day and this barometric pressure right on down the line. You can just be like, I know that they are critters who like an edge, and I can see that, and I can structure my route to it. Yeah,
that's exactly right. It's like, it's taking that step back, and this is like, touching on multiple points we talked about, but take a step back, look at like why, like think about why are the birds going to be in this area? It's like, well, to your point, if it's a big 100-acre cattail slough, like that's a lot of ground to cover. So, I mean, my approach is I am very, like, I will not sit and beat areas up in terms of, like, if there's a 100-acre cattail slough, like, I'm not going to walk through it. I'm gonna go and pick apart
Right.
the key areas. I'm gonna go to the next spot. Pick apart the key areas, go to the next spot.
Right.
Versus I don't walk and cover the entire thing. It's like a power fishing. Like
Right.
go
Right.
to the best areas. But why are those birds in that area? Is there a crop field on this side of like if there's a crop field, say on the left side of the swamp, well, odds are the birds are probably going to be there, especially if it's, on a backside where there's less pressure. I'm going to go walk those key areas and then go.
Right. Well, we talk about this all the time, but like the access issue, like where does the pressure originate from? Because you can just about look into the future and see what people are going to do.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff too, even just hunting a different way. But if you think about, like I had this for years in the whitetail space, like how do you find bucks on public land? How do you find bucks on public land? Most of what I'm doing is just trying to do something different than other people. And then if you can figure out, like, they usually do this, if I try this, then you'll bump into the animals that know that they usually do this.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was thinking about this at the end of the season this year in Minnesota, where I was like, these pheasants have us so figured out by now.
Oh, yeah.
Because they get hunted so much. So unless I do something different and play that wind right and structure my routes to, like, just show them something
Take
different.
advantage of that
Right.
knowledge.
Right. That I think about every big game animal I've ever hunted. Of course, they're going to pattern you on public land. If a pheasant can do it,
Yeah.
if the grouse can sit out there and they can hear that four-wheeler on the two-track and they can be in that old homestead with the crab apples or whatever, they're just going to do that. And the pressure's going to go by them over and over again.
Yeah, that's a super interesting point. I've got a kind of a fun case study. So there's a piece of public land, a WMA, near my house that I run the dogs on every day that's legal. So from July 15th to April 1st, like I would go, if I wasn't hunting, I would go take all the dogs out and we'd go run the WMA every single day. We would do this. It was just exercise for the dogs. But I would do the same route every single day, and by doing it every single day, you see those patterns on what those birds are doing. Like people would come and it's like I'd be there and they'd come hunt it during the season. I wasn't hunting, I was just running them, and it's like I see what they would do, and it's like I do this every day, so I can tell you what they're going to do, where they're going to be, etc. But yeah, it's like clockwork. I would see somebody pull in and they would walk down the edge around this shelter belt. It's like, man, I do this every day, and these birds, like, they know this game. Like, there's a lot of birds on this piece of property, but maybe, I don't know, 1 out of 10 days would I maybe move a pheasant, or my dogs. Like, I would get in range to shoot a pheasant if I was hunting. And so, yeah, it's just really interesting to see,
They just
to your
figure
point,
it out.
how well they learn that. And on this property, there's access on the back side of it as well, but it's overgrown. You kind of got to pick your way to get to it. And the times that I go and park there and work it the opposite way, it's like the birds, they just don't understand what's going on there.
Right.
It's like, oh. And if I go, and I rarely do that side, but if I do, it's like almost every time I am getting within gun range of a bird.
Right.
So, yeah, it's just very interesting.
It's not that complicated.
No.
It just takes a little different. We got to wrap this up here in a second. I want to talk about just a couple things. I know so people are going to listen to this and they're going to be like, well, there's still no birds on public land by my house. And I just want to say, like, when I moved to the suburbs of the Twin Cities, I was like, I have no birds. I have no birds to hunt. But I had to find a place to hunt deer. So I started scouting whitetails because I'm like, I gotta be in a tree stand. I just do. And I started finding wood ducks that were real patternable. I started finding some teal that were real patternable. I had a retriever, so I was like, well, switch gears now.
Yeah.
And in the process of that, it just hit me so hard. I was like, I had taken woodcock for granted because I have access to big woods, lots of woodcock stuff if I want it.
Yeah.
I'd rather hunt grouse. I'd rather hunt a lot of stuff than a woodcock just would. But I remember sitting on a tree stand in this spot in the cities, listening to traffic and watching woodcock fly into this swamp and just going, okay, they have no idea where they're at. Yeah. So even though 11 months of year, you might not have a viable upland bird like population at all to hunt there. There's a time in October
For
where
sure.
all of a sudden these worm eaters from Canada show up,
Yep.
and you can go in there and have a true upland hunt. And I started all of my dogs as puppies on woodcock in the Twin Cities,
That's
in a
cool.
place where people are like, you can't do it.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's a window. Is it your dream hunt? No.
I love shooting woodcock.
Right.
It's great, but yeah, no. Is it like the end all be all best thing in the world? Probably not.
Well, but what I mean by that is, like, do people want to sit there and listen to morning rush hour
yeah.
traffic? Like, love woodcock, hate them, I don't care.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, like, if you looked at that scenario, you'd be like, that's not necessarily like where I wouldn't
Right.
choose it. I would draw up a better plan, but it was even there. So I'm like, all I want to say is, like, there probably are opportunities closer than you think for something at some point in the season where you can get your dog out, find some birds on public land, and still have a badass hunt.
Yeah, and that's, it's that taking that step back and realizing, like, hey, it might not be woodcock. You might live in Phoenix. It's like, well, in that case, it's called the Gamble's quail, right?
Right.
They're
Right.
they're littered. Like, you pick a city, and there's probably something happening there. It's just taking that step back and say, hey, maybe I won't. Talking to a guy here at Seawee, and he was like, yeah, I hunted 40 days and I found one covey of quail. And he's like, then I figured, I heard about woodcock, and now I'm making 10 contacts a day.
Right.
So he's like, that was a game changer, right? So
Right.
it's taking that step back and realize, like, okay, what other opportunities are here for me if I'm developing a dog, etc.
Right. You brought up the Arizona thing. I know I said I was going to wrap this up. We will in a second. I've never done it. I know a whole bunch of people who have. And, you're talking a state that's like 50% public land, 3 different species of quail. Season goes into like February, or it did.
Yeah, still does.
So it's a destination place for a lot of people who have the means to be like, I want to keep my freaking season going. But the people I know who are really good at that down there, you would have thousands of acres of the same kind of mono habitat. Like, where are these birds?
Right.
Where do you start? Well, if you live in the desert, you're going to get thirsty. So you can look at those cattle tanks, the water tanks, like the guzzlers, and start there and be like, now my route is this, instead of lighting out across the desert and being like, I hope I find a covey of quail in this. And so just even a little intention and using some tools there to put you at least where, like, at some point in the day, these birds are going to drink. Maybe it's this one. Maybe it's the next one where it spills out and there's some nice grass below it or something, but they're going to show up there, and you're already putting your odds are just better to get your dog some contacts and get you just like have a better hunt. I love that shit.
Yeah, because I remember distinctly, first time I hunted New Mexico, like, we just went out, and it was this area that there were birds there. We saw them from the road. They were running around, but it was a big creosote flat. So just the same thing for hundreds of thousands of acres. And sure, there were birds in there, but the other thing, like we talked about, is finding where they are and where you can actually get an opportunity to shoot one. There, they would just, they were as fast as my damn pointer was. Like, they were just running. You could never hold them. Went to a different area, thicker grass.
Right.
And, okay, now they're going to hold here. Or this is an opportunity where we can pin them against something. So that was an eye-opening experience.
That shit's so fun.
Yeah.
So fun. All right, we got to wrap this up. There's tons of people here at the expo and adorable puppies walking by us.
Right. Ben,
thanks so much. If you're listening to this and you want to figure out where birds are, obviously, Ben works for Onyx. We have a tight relationship with him, but it's like that's one of the tools that puts so many birds in my game bag. I live off of it because it just works.
Yeah. Appreciate it, Tony.
Well, thanks,
Thank
buddy.
you. Yeah.